Hey y'all, Andrew here, and today I want to share with you 4 stories about drinking and the law, both here in New Orleans and beyond. And let's start with Bourbon Street. Even if you haven't been to Bourbon Street, you probably can still picture it. You got buildings from the 1850s, neon signs from the 1950s, beads flying through the air, little kids drumming on buckets with amazing rhythm, and some of the best people watching in the world. People cut loose on Bourbon Street, and they do it because that's the legend. Bourbon, and kind of New Orleans in general, is supposed to be a place where you can do what you wanna. You can stay out all night, in a costume, carrying around a beer the size of a baby. And that's not a random image. You never have to look very far to spot someone who brought their baby to Bourbon Street. And the most exciting part, at least for a lot of Americans, is that you can do something here that's illegal in most of the rest of the country. You can drink alcohol outside. The fact that you can drink outside here is the thing people know about New Orleans. And yet it's kind of amazing how little most of us know about the details. Visitors have a lot of questions. Where can you drink outside? Out of what containers? Is anything illegal in New Orleans? Those are great questions, and I address them in another, much shorter video, which I will link everywhere. But while I was working on that video, I decided I'd do a dig into a more local question. Why you can drink outside here, where it comes from. And that turned out to lead to a bunch of cool stories that I had never heard before. So this video is going to be those stories. First, why New Orleans is different from the rest of the US. Second, why the US is different from the rest of the world. Third, how we got the laws we do have in New Orleans. And fourth, why it is often Louisiana and not New Orleans that is the really weird one. And we're going to tell those stories right here in my cozy little office. It's going to be a pretty chill video. But first, I spent some time on Bourbon Street for this video, and I want to subject you to a quick little 1-minute montage of some of that famous people watching. Take a deep breath. 3, 2, 1.
It's really bright out here.
So, after witnessing that, a lot of visitors are curious about the whole drinking outside thing. And American visitors in particular often phrase their question in this very specific way. Something like, what's the law here that says you can drink outside? It's an interesting phrasing because, laws don't normally say what you can do. Laws normally say what you have to do or what you can't do. But can is everything else. Can is what there aren't laws about. And yet, in most of the US, if you want to be able to drink in public, you actually do need a law that says you can. A lot of American cities have one little area designated by law as the place where you can drink outside, and it's called an entertainment district. Entertainment districts often feel kind of like Bourbon Street, and so it's natural that visitors from other parts of the US might look at Bourbon Street and think that it's another entertainment district. So when they ask, what's the law, indirectly, they might be asking, what are the limits? If I walk a few steps in the wrong direction, will the drink I'm carrying just become illegal? And the answer is no. In New Orleans, other than a few parks, you can drink in public anywhere. And the law that says you can? There isn't one. You just can. To make sense out of this, let's talk about how alcohol laws typically work in the US. It can feel in the US like we have a lot of nationwide rules. No drinking in public, no drinking under 21, things like that. But the laws behind those rules are very rarely actually nationwide, meaning they're not federal laws. Federal alcohol law is mostly just about regulating the alcohol industry. But besides that, most alcohol laws are off limits for the federal government. They have to leave those laws to the states. And the feds do give the states nudges on certain laws, but hold that thought for later. So the vast majority of laws around what regular people do with alcohol, buying it, having it, drinking it, those are state and local laws. If a rule feels bigger than that, it's probably just because the state and local laws are pretty consistent from place to place. And even then, they're probably not as consistent as they seem. Like take drinking age, for example. Drinking age laws are state laws, and there's little differences in them from place to place. But even the number, the age, is different some places. It's 21 in most of the US, but in Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands, the drinking age is 18. So there's 99% consistency, but there are just enough exceptions to prove that exceptions are possible. Which brings us back to drinking in public. Drinking in public is banned in most US states, and in the handful where it's not, a lot of local governments have banned it on a local scale. Between all of the state and local bans, it's illegal to drink in public almost everywhere in the US. But there are exceptions, two kinds of them. First, there are entertainment districts, which are exceptions written into a ban. Basically, a city or state has a law that says drinking in public is illegal everywhere except right here. One little island of can in an ocean of can't. But the other kind of exception is places where there just isn't a law against public drinking in the first place. And New Orleans is one of those. Basically, it's legal to drink outside in New Orleans because it's not illegal. And that weirdly simple situation makes New Orleans a huge rarity in the US. By the way, I don't mean to suggest that people from New Orleans are any better than anyone else at understanding the law. Like, to us, drinking outside just feels normal. It feels so normal that when we travel, we're the ones asking weird questions. Like, is a patio outside? Are the front steps outside? What happens if I stand right in the door? So yeah, apologies to all the many bar staff that we the people of New Orleans have bothered and confused over the years. So now, knowing all of that, our original question, why can you drink outside in New Orleans, kind of gets flipped. Like, why can't you drink outside in most of the rest of the US? Yeah, who's the weird one now? In most of the world, it is legal to drink in public. And the US isn't the only place that's banned it, but we were the first. So these laws have American roots. And it's easy to guess that maybe they relate to the Puritan roots of a lot of the US, roots which New Orleans famously doesn't share. With that idea in mind, let me ask a question. When would you guess that the US got its first ever law against drinking in public? State law or local law? Take a guess. Until 1953, it was legal to drink outside anywhere in the US. And it's hard to say how common it was, but it did happen. Like, people who worked outside might have a beer during lunch, or business at a bar might overflow into the street. God forbid. But then we got laws against it. First in 1953 in Chicago, and then by the 1980s, these laws were everywhere. So in those years, something happened, something changed to make people feel like these laws were necessary. As for what changed, I can name 4 things. And the first 3 kind of go together, and they sort of make it look like what we were banning was Bourbon Street. Reason number 1 is garbage. And this is a pretty unflattering piece, the Bourbon Street picture, but garbage is something you'll see a lot of if you walk Bourbon early in the morning after a big night. And credit where it's due, Bourbon Street gets a deep clean every morning, and the cleaners are kind of incredible to watch. But all of that work is only necessary because we keep trashing the place again. And if you look close at the garbage on Bourbon Street, the main thing you're gonna see is disposable drink containers, which were new in the 1950s. We're not talking about plastic yet, but the 1950s is when we first start to get disposable glass bottles and metal cans. Before this, empties were supposed to be returned and refilled. Now, they're garbage forever. And what do you do with them? That's up to all of us, including the very drunkest among us. So litter becomes a much bigger problem in the 1950s. And when that very first law against drinking in public is passed in 1953, litter is an explicit reason why. Reason number 2 is tourism. And tourism's not new in the 1950s, but it does get a huge boost from the growth of the American middle class after World War II. Travel comes in reach for a lot more people, and the result is a weird combination of yay and ugh. Because traveling is great, but being traveled to can get old pretty fast. I mean, Bourbon Street was a little quiet middle-class corridor at one time, with a lot more residents, until this very explosion of tourism came along. And now...
You come on, fellas, say hell yeah! If you trying to get fucked up, say hell yeah! Ain't rushing shit, let's go.
And Bourbon Street is far from unique. I mean, anybody who's lived near a tourist center knows the costs of heavy tourism. Crowds, noise, garbage, traffic, high prices, people who need directions all the time. Cemetery plundering. That's maybe more just a New Orleans problem. And those costs were new in the 1950s to 80s, and they were scary enough to get new laws passed. Reason number 3 is young people having more freedom than before. During these years, a lot more kids start going to college, and for our purposes, that means the invention of spring break. A lot of beach towns are eager to pick up public drinking laws. One city's origin story kind of captures it all: Newport, Rhode Island. They host a jazz festival every year, and in 1960, a big crowd shows up, more people than the festival can accommodate. So a lot of people, especially young people, get turned away at the gate. They've come a long way, they want to hear the music. I mean, Louis Armstrong is playing. So they hang out outside the festival grounds, and they listen from a distance, and they drink. Police eventually tell them to leave. Some of the visitors start throwing some of those newfangled disposable drink containers, and the police respond with fire hoses and tear gas and call in the National Guard. Shit escalates. By the way, in my head, this is all scored with like a heavy metal cover of What a Wonderful World. This battle in the streets got written up as a Teens Gone Wild story, and the public drinking law that Newport passed soon after became a model for other cities. So 3 reasons for banning public drinking: garbage, tourists, and panic about youth. Again, kind of a picture of Bourbon Street, although age on Bourbon Street, kind of all over the map. And it's easy to understand why those changes freaked people out and made them want to do something. But it's still kind of strange what we decided to do, because garbage, tourism, kids being intense, those are worldwide problems. They're not unique to the US, but our reaction was unique. Like, we saw trash and clueless travelers and annoying kids, and somehow that meant we should ban drinking outside. What's the connection there? And maybe we just thought drinking outside was a thing trashy, clueless, annoying people did. Maybe we thought we were banning being trashy and clueless and annoying. If so, well, we created the Bourbon Street brand. Because sometimes you want to be trashy and clueless and annoying, and there should be somewhere you can go when that urge strikes. Somewhere you can feel like you're breaking the rules without actually having to break the law. And that's why, as long as the law stays the way it is, Bourbon Street is always going to have a clientele. But I said there were 4 reasons, and the last one is kind of in a category by itself. This is a big story, big change that happens in the US legal system. During our whole 50s to 80s period, there's a category of old laws that more or less disappears, and public drinking laws were part of an effort to replace them. To help this make sense, I want to read you some parts from an old law from Jacksonville, Florida. This is what's called a vagrancy law that's theoretically about vagrants, people who wander from place to place. Although this law cast its net a little bit wider. Under this law, police could arrest some pretty stunning categories of people, such as rogues and vagabonds, dissolute persons, lewd, wanton, and lascivious persons, common railers, habitual loafers, persons strolling about from place to place without any lawful purpose, disorderly persons, and persons who use juggling. Lots we could say about that law, but for one thing, it is incredibly vague, other than the weirdly specific thing about juggling. Under that law, police could just decide that you had loafed once too often, and then a judge could fine you $500 or send you to jail for 90 days, or both. And luckily, that's all in the past, because this law was found unconstitutional by the US Supreme Court in what year? Let's guess. (1972) is when it became legal to rail across the United States. Can you imagine? The whole internet is just people railing. And this Supreme Court decision, as overdue as it was, it set off a chain reaction, because the reason the Supreme Court found that law unconstitutional was because it was too vague. And that meant that now places all over the country had to rewrite not just their vagrancy laws, but lots of other vague laws too, including some laws very close to our subject matter, laws against public drunkenness. Delicate distinction here. So far we've been talking about laws against drinking in public, which began in 1953, but laws against being drunk in public are so much older. And drinking and being drunk, obviously similar, but a difference between them is this vagueness thing. A law against drinking is clear, you're either drinking or you're not. Whereas a law against being drunk is vague. How drunk is drunk? It's a judgment call. And for most of US history, it was a judgment call that police could make to arrest all kinds of people in all kinds of situations. And you could use public drunkenness to stop a drunken fight before it started. Or you could use it to arrest a homeless person who fell asleep on someone's lawn. It was a really flexible tool, until this 1972 Supreme Court decision. After that decision, lots of places rewrote their public drunkenness laws to make them less vague. So now, instead of punishing drunkenness, they punished things a drunk person might do, like fighting. And the idea was to make the law clearer and fairer, but it also meant making the law less flexible. Now you couldn't use it to prevent the drunken fight. You had to wait till the fight started. And you couldn't use it to arrest the homeless person, which police were still getting asked to do. So we banned a bunch of new things, like sleeping in public and drinking in public. It's clearer, so theoretically it's fairer, but there's still plenty of room for enforcement to be vague. One more thing worth knowing before we move on, not every city in the US updated its public drunkenness laws during this time. New Orleans didn't. We still have one, and it is still pretty vague. It's also enforced a lot. A little bit more on that in our practical guidance video. Here's something that really surprised me. This whole movement in the US to ban drinking in public, 50s to 80s, New Orleans was a part of it. We passed a law too, only ours was a little bit different. Here's what happened. During this time, New Orleans was facing the same problems as the rest of the country. Trash was a problem, God knows messy tourism was a problem. And apparently things got especially messy during Mardi Gras of 1972. That Mardi Gras, there was a lot of broken glass bottles in the French Quarter. The glass caused some injuries, and the injuries got blamed, at least by a few loud people, on hippies, aka young tourists. So the setup here is exactly the American norm. You've got trash, tourists, and young people. But the response here was a little bit different. The New Orleans City Council responded by banning something super specific: drinking out of glass or metal containers in public in the French Quarter. And not just drinking alcohol, drinking anything out of glass or metal containers. Alcohol was fine, as long as you drank it out of something else. In fact, the sponsor of this bill had a suggestion. He said that when you visit the quarter, you should just pack your wineskin. Sadly, to this day, I've never seen a wineskin in the French Quarter, and yet the image of someone drinking a frozen daiquiri out of a bedazzled wineskin feels like the most French Quarter thing possible. Please feel free to make that happen for me. So while the rest of the country was passing alcohol laws, New Orleans passed a garbage law. And not like a garbage law, but a garbage law. And in the newspaper, a police spokesperson said they were going to enforce this law not just on people carrying alcohol, but on everybody. He said babies can drink their milk out of a plastic bottle. Proof that even then, people were bringing their babies to Bourbon Street. This law changed how people did things in the quarter. Like, reporters went around when the ban went into effect and interviewed people as they drank out of a plastic cup for the first time in their lives. People were surprised that plastic didn't affect how a drink tasted. So it was a big change, but it happened. The French Quarter turned into a go-cup neighborhood overnight. Now, if you know how things work in New Orleans today, you may be like, Andrew, why did this surprise you? These are the rules now. Drink outside if you want, but no glass in the quarter. And yeah, that's right. None of that is the surprise. The surprise is what happened next, something that to me feels very un-New Orleans. In 1977, 5 years after the French Quarter law passed, the city council expanded it to cover the entire city. And they did it because there was pressure on them to come up with litter laws. Litter in 1977 was a big growing problem everywhere, and the state government wasn't doing much about it, which left it up to local governments. And litter was also a relatively new problem. There weren't a lot of established solutions, so local governments were sort of flailing for ideas. But in New Orleans, we already had a success story on the books. This French Quarter law had been working well for 5 years. So the city council took that law and stretched it citywide. No drinking anything out of glass or metal in public anywhere in New Orleans. And this just cleaved the law away from its intended purpose. It had been designed to address dangerous garbage in one very drunk neighborhood. Now we were asking it to solve garbage, all of it. Let me put it a different way. We took a stand against litter by requiring everyone in town to pour their drinks from one disposable container into another disposable container before they could go outside. Obviously, I think this 1977 garbage law was a garbage law, and that turns out to be a popular opinion. In 2001, New Orleans had protests about this law after police shot and killed a guy who they'd stopped just because he was carrying a can of beer in public. The protests made it clear something needed to happen, and the city council started by commissioning a study of the law's history. That study found a few things. One, the law was unique, which maybe explains why it was confusing to a lot of people. Even some police thought that it was an alcohol law. Second, in terms of enforcement, the study found that the vast majority of the law's enforcement was against black men, like the guy who had been shot. And finally, the law was redundant. By 2001, we had litter laws, and we had laws for any other purpose that one might argue that the container law served. In the end, almost no one spoke up for this law, except for some people in the quarter, where the law had begun and where it worked. So the city council recreated the version that just affected the quarter, and the rest of it, they repealed, which is how we get to where we are today. Last thought on this one, something I don't know is how seriously people in New Orleans took this container law while it was citywide. This is a place where my experience limits me. I was not of drinking age in 2001, so if you were, and if you were in New Orleans, I'd love a comment with whatever you remember. Let's talk about drinking laws in Louisiana. Louisiana, like New Orleans, has no law against drinking in public. It's legal statewide to drink in a moving vehicle, if that vehicle is a Mardi Gras float. And it's legal to have a profoundly alcoholic frozen drink in your car, as long as you don't open it or put in a straw. That is Louisiana's famous drive-through daiquiri law, which is a whole story unto itself, and I'll get into it in another video. Basically, when it comes to drinking laws, Louisiana is weirder than New Orleans. And Louisiana used to be weirder still. Until 1995, our drinking age in Louisiana was for all practical purposes 18, and you could drink as a passenger in any vehicle until 2004. And I say weird. Those rules are weird for the US now, but at one time they were normal. Louisiana just stayed the same while most other states changed. And as for why Louisiana was such a holdout, I mean, we have vibrant drinking traditions and we have a history of laissez-faire thinking. Those things are important. But they've also gotten help from something way less visible: lobbying. Alcohol is an industry, and it's a big one in Louisiana. Beer, in particular, has always been big enough here to really pull strings. And the biggest string puller for a long time was a man named George Brown, who was a lobbyist for the Beer Industry League of Louisiana. Now, growing up in Louisiana, I had never heard of George Brown, but he pulled strings here for a long time. He was a lobbyist from 1949 until not long before he died in 2007. And he got a lot of laws passed, or in some cases not passed. And as for what kinds of laws, so far we've focused on flashy laws, and George Brown's fingerprints are on some of those, the daiquiri law, for example. But this man was a lobbyist. His job was to make it easy to produce and sell alcohol in Louisiana. So a lot of his attention went to the more esoteric kinds of laws that, let's say, cover the backside of the industry. For example, excise taxes, taxes on manufacturing. George Brown kept excise taxes on beer from going up in Louisiana for more than half a century. Another example, in most states, if a bar owner keeps serving drinks to a customer who is clearly drunk, and then that customer gets in their car, drives away, and hits somebody, that bar owner can be held partly responsible for the harm their customer caused. Those are called dram shop laws, and Louisiana doesn't have one, which is unusual. But on top of that, Louisiana blocks local governments within the state from passing dram shop laws of their own. That is unique, and that was George Brown. So how did George Brown get this stuff done? Well, politics in Louisiana is about who you know, and he was good at knowing people. He threw parties, he barbecued, he gave away a lot of free beer, he paid for meals and hotel rooms. Basically, he brightened people's days in ways that were various degrees of legal. And maybe the most important line on George Brown's resume was the time he spent in prison. Here's how it started. It's the mid-1970s, and George Brown is lobbying for a law which would make life a little easier for breweries located in the state. The law passes, and afterwards, George Brown visits 2 of those breweries. And at each brewery, somebody gives him $15,000 in cash off the books. This looks suspicious, and somehow word of it gets to the feds, who start an investigation and eventually put George Brown on trial. And in the course of that trial, several people imply that the money was supposed to be a bribe for some legislator or other, a thank you for their yes vote. George Brown was just supposed to be the middleman, but no one would say who the legislator was, and George Brown wouldn't say he'd given the money to anyone, which left him on the hook for all that cash, which he hadn't reported as income, which is a crime. So we can imagine George Brown facing a hard decision: rat out a legislator and avoid prison, or protect the legislator and do time. George Brown picked prison, and it leafed his resume in gold. When he got out, 6 months later, he was better positioned than ever to get things done, and he got out in time for the biggest fight of his career. By now it's the 1980s, so the big wave of public drinking laws we've been talking about, that's mostly done. But another wave of new drinking laws is just starting. At this time, there's an organization called Mothers Against Drunk Driving, or MAD. And they're going state to state advocating for laws that they thought would reduce drunk driving. And drunk driving is a real problem. In the US, we drink a little more than most of the world, and we drive way more than most of the world, which adds up to a lot of danger. I mean, I've met a lot of young international travelers in New Orleans who have asked me, what the hell, at home I can drink at 18? Why do I have to wait till I'm 21 in the US? This is the best answer I can offer. It's not that we're Puritans. Our laws are different because we drive a lot. But in the 80s, 21 wasn't yet the standard drinking age. It varied by state from 21 all the way down to 18. And MAD was campaigning for the states with lower drinking ages to raise them to 21. In Louisiana, George Brown was having none of it. At the time, Louisiana's drinking age was 18, and it had been for a while. 18-year-olds were buying alcohol. George Brown's job was to keep those sales up. So he pulled strings, and MAD found it really hard to get votes in the Louisiana legislature. Louisiana was not the only state that gave MAD a hard time, so eventually MAD went big and got a federal law passed. It was called the National Minimum Drinking Age Act. Now, the federal government can't pass laws about drinking age. That's reserved for the states. So the federal government passed a different kind of law, a law about highway funding. This was the idea. One of the federal government's jobs is to apportion money to the states for highways to build them and maintain them. And the federal government has a responsibility to make sure that that money is well spent. And highways can be pretty dangerous, especially if young, inexperienced drivers are also drinking. So, if a state allows young, inexperienced drivers to drink, well, maybe it's in the federal government's interest to reapportion some of that state's funding from highway construction to, say, safety programs. That was what the new federal law did. It said any state or territory with a drinking age under 21 would have some of their highway funding reallocated. And sure, a state might then decide to change its drinking age in order to get that money back where they wanted it, but the federal government didn't tell them to do that. All it did was give them a nudge. So I mentioned earlier that the federal government sometimes nudges states on their alcohol laws. This was where the nudges began. George Brown was not a fan of the federal government nudging states. And if he'd been at the table, he would have said that this was a matter of personal rights and responsibilities, and the government shouldn't be involved. But he would have been making those arguments to Ronald Reagan. Reagan was the president in 1984 who enthusiastically signed the National Minimum Drinking Age Act. And he also didn't love the idea of the federal government nudging states, but he said if there was ever a time that it made sense, this was it. A time when lives could be saved. Anyway, George Brown wasn't at the table. The federal law passed, and it worked. States and territories started to raise their drinking ages. Even Louisiana was headed in that direction, and George Brown couldn't stop it. All he could do was nudge what the new law looked like. And he had an idea for how to have it all, how to keep Louisiana from losing highway funding, and keep alcohol sales up. The new law George Brown helped pass, it did make it illegal for 18 to 20-year-olds to buy alcohol. But it didn't make it illegal to sell alcohol to 18 to 20-year-olds. Selling was okay, just buying was forbidden. Of course, to buy a drink, you normally need to go into a bar, and most states don't let you into bars if you're underage. But in Louisiana, it is legal, at least at the state level, for 18 to 20-year-olds to enter bars and even buy drinks. They're just supposed to stick to Shirley Temples. So the new law technically made the drinking age 21, but in a way that was deliberately impossible to enforce. Law enforcement would have had to be in every bar, witnessing every transaction. And if enforcement ever did happen, well, selling wasn't illegal, only buying was illegal. So the consequences would fall entirely on kids. So earlier I said our drinking age was 18 for all practical purposes until 1995. This was why. This clever scheme of George Brown's did not work. It just didn't work. I mean, it bought some time, but the loophole was pretty obvious. The feds saw it, and so we did in fact end up losing highway funding for a while. So if you don't like the quality of the roads in Louisiana, raise a glass to George Brown, among many others. In 1995, Louisiana amended its law to make the drinking age 21 for real, which it is to this day. There's been legal challenges, new ideas for loopholes. None of it has worked so far, but they keep coming, even with George Brown gone, which I guess goes to show that business and lobbying play a part, but sometimes it really is just our vibrant drinking traditions and our non-Puritan roots and our deep hatred of being told what to do. Nowadays, if you visit Louisiana from a different state, most of the rules you're used to are going to apply here, except that in some places, you can drink outside. And hey, if you'd like some tips on how that works here in New Orleans, we have another video, so much shorter, that's just about those practicalities. Check that out if it's helpful. And soon we'll have another video about the drive-thru daiquiri thing, so do yourself a favor and chuck a disposable drink container at that subscribe button. And please feel free to be a common railer down in the comments. There is so much I want to know about this one. What experiences have you had with New Orleans drinking laws? What can you get away with where you're from? How does this all look from the rest of the world? And of course, we always welcome people watching stories from Bourbon Street. Cheers, y'all. See you next time. It's just coffee.